The space station Astra 7 bustled with life from dozens of worlds, each species bringing its own peculiarities to the vast corridors of metal and light. Zalith, a Xylarian scientist, walked briskly through the promenade, her violet-tinted skin shimmering under the station's artificial sun. Her four-fingered hands clutched a datapad filled with details about an Earth artifact she had reluctantly agreed to study. To her, humans were a curiosity, primitive creatures who somehow stumbled into the galactic stage. She didn't understand the fuss about them. The artifact in question sat in the station's research wing, a small, cube-like device with intricate carvings and strange symbols. Despite its simple appearance, no one had been able to unlock its secrets. Zalith sighed as she entered the lab. Another wasted day, she thought. Inside, she spotted a human already examining the artifact. His brown hair was slightly messy, and he wore a jacket that seemed out of place in the pristine laboratory. He turned and smiled warmly. "You must be Zalith," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Mark. They asked me to help with this little puzzle." Zalith stared at his outstretched hand, then folded her arms. "I didn't request assistance," she said, her tone clipped. "Especially not from a human." Mark chuckled, lowering his hand. "Fair enough. But they thought a xenolinguist like me might have some insight." Zalith sighed and motioned for him to proceed. She had no patience for human optimism, but at least he wasn't slowing her down. For the next hour, Mark studied the artifact, his fingers tracing the symbols while he muttered theories. Zalith worked at her station, occasionally glancing at him with skepticism. She was about to dismiss his efforts entirely when Mark suddenly straightened up. "I think this might be a language," he said, excitement in his voice. "These symbols could represent numerical sequences, but they also have phonetic structures." Zalith raised an eyebrow. "That's hardly groundbreaking." Mark smiled. "True, but if I'm right, this could be a message, a greeting, maybe, or instructions." He began tapping sequences into his translator. To Zalith's surprise, the artifact emitted a faint glow. Her eyes widened as symbols appeared in the air above the cube. "This is Xylarian," she said, astonished. "But an ancient dialect no one speaks anymore. How did you?" "Lucky guess," Mark said, grinning. "Or maybe I just have a knack for puzzles." Zalith felt a strange mix of emotions, annoyance at his smugness, but also a spark of admiration. She leaned closer to examine the symbols, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time, she addressed him without disdain. "You may have helped more than I expected, Mark." "Glad to hear it," he said. "Maybe humans aren't so bad after all." As they worked together to decipher the artifact's secrets, Zalith couldn't shake the feeling that this human might be more interesting than she had anticipated. The lab's atmosphere shifted as Zalith and Mark continued working together. While Zalith maintained a professional demeanor, she couldn't help but notice Mark's peculiar traits. He asked too many questions, laughed at his own jokes, and seemed overly fascinated with even the most mundane details of Xylarian culture. To her, humans were an oddity, but Mark took that perception to a whole new level. "So," Mark began as he tapped away on his translator, "do all Xylarians prefer to work alone, or is it just you?" Zalith glanced up from her holographic display, her amethyst eyes narrowing. "We value efficiency, not distractions," she replied curtly. "Your incessant chatter is unnecessary." Mark leaned back with a mock look of offense. "Hey, some of the best discoveries come from collaboration. Even humans figured that out. And we're, as you said, primitive." Zalith frowned. "I never said." "You implied it," Mark interrupted with a grin. "Don't worry. I'm not offended. Much." Despite herself, Zalith felt the corner of her lips twitch in amusement. She quickly masked it, focusing on the artifact. It still hovered in midair, its ancient symbols glowing faintly. Each line and curve told a story, but decoding it was proving to be a challenge. Mark leaned closer, his curiosity unrelenting. "What do these symbols mean to your people?" "They represent knowledge," Zalith explained, her tone softening slightly. In ancient Silurian culture, artifacts like this were used to pass down wisdom from one generation to the next. They believed such objects were alive, imbued with the essence of those who created them. Mark nodded thoughtfully. Kind of like a time capsule. That's amazing. Humans have similar traditions, though our methods are less elegant. Zalith tilted her head. Humans use simple methods because they lack the sophistication of advanced species. Mark smirked. Or maybe because we make do with what we have. Resilience is kind of our thing. Zalith paused. Resilience. It wasn't a word she often associated with humans, yet Mark's presence seemed to embody it. His persistence, his questions, even his annoying optimism, all of it hinted at a depth she hadn't considered before. "Tell me," she said, her voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "Why are you so fascinated by other cultures? Most humans I've met are content to stay on their little planet." Mark's expression softened. "Because there's so much out here to learn. I grew up on stories of other worlds, other species. I wanted to see them for myself, to understand what connects us all." "Isn't that why you study artifacts like this?" Zalith didn't answer immediately. She had always believed her work was about preserving Silurian history, but Mark's words made her wonder if there was more to it. Was she searching for connection too? Before she could respond, the artifact emitted a sudden pulse of light, interrupting their conversation. Mark and Zalith exchanged a look, both startled and intrigued. "Looks like we just unlocked the next level," Mark said with a grin. The pulse from the artifact faded, leaving behind an eerie silence. Zalith and Mark both stared at the floating cube, which now seemed to shimmer with a faint blue glow. The symbols they had been working to decode were now slowly rearranging themselves, forming new patterns. "This is," Zalith began, her voice faltering for the first time since they'd met. "This isn't just a message, it's something much more." Mark, unable to contain his excitement, leaned closer to the artifact, his eyes wide. "You're right. This is alive. Do you think it's a kind of map? Or maybe a guide?" Zalith nodded, her mind racing. The patterns shifting in the air felt too precise to be random. Someone, or something, had designed this. But why? And what was it trying to tell them? "Could it be leading us somewhere?" Mark asked, his voice filled with wonder. Zalith hesitated. The Exilarian scientists had warned her about trusting artifacts without understanding their true purpose. Many cultures, especially human ones, believed in things that were more mythical than scientific. "This could be dangerous," she said, turning toward Mark. "We need to be careful. We don't know what this artifact is truly capable of." Mark didn't seem worried. He was used to challenges, to diving headfirst into the unknown. Dangerous, sure, but it's also exciting. "And besides," he added with a grin, "we make a great team." Zalith gave him a doubtful look. "A team?" "Yeah," Mark said, still grinning. "You're the brains. I'm the guy who actually gets things done. We've already made progress, haven't we?" Zalith felt a strange warmth in her chest at his words, though she would never admit it. He was right about one thing. They had made progress, and it was because they had combined their skills in a way neither could have done alone. She was starting to see him differently, not just as a human, but as an ally. "Fine," she said, trying to maintain her usual detachment. "We'll see this through. But if this leads to more trouble, I'm holding you responsible." Mark laughed, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Deal." With that, they set to work. Zalith worked her way through the artifact symbols, trying to match them to ancient Silurian texts. Meanwhile, Mark used his translator to make sense of the human words that were appearing alongside the symbols. The two of them worked tirelessly, hours passing without either of them noticing. The artifact continued to pulse softly, guiding them towards something they couldn't yet understand. As they labored side by side, a bond began to form between them, forged through shared purpose and determination. Finally, just as the first rays of the station's artificial sunrise filtered through the lab windows, the artifact clicked. The symbols on the cube stopped shifting, and a new sequence of numbers appeared, glowing brightly. "We did it," Zaelith whispered, her voice filled with awe. For the first time, she truly believed in Mark's potential. Mark beamed. "Told you we made a great team." Zaelith turned toward him, her expression softening. "Perhaps I underestimated you, human." Mark shrugged. "Hey, no harm done. But I think we both underestimated what we could accomplish together." Zaelith felt something stir inside her, a sense of connection she had never imagined possible with a human. And as the artifact's light flickered one final time, she realized that she, too, was no longer just a scientist. She was part of something much larger, a partnership that could change everything. The station's hum was the only sound that filled the lab as Zaelith and Mark stared at the artifact. Its glow was now steady, not flickering like before, and the symbols were no longer shifting. They had cracked it, and the feeling of accomplishment settled in the air like a palpable weight. Zaelith let out a slow breath. "It's a map," she said quietly, still processing the implications. "Not a simple map, though. It's a star map leading to a hidden location." Mark leaned forward, his excitement clearly visible on his face. "A hidden location. Where? Somewhere on your planet?" Zaelith shook her head. "No, it's farther than that. This map points to an uncharted region, beyond the borders of Tylarian space. It's almost as if..." Mark raised an eyebrow. "As if what?" "As if it's a place that no one was meant to find. A place forgotten by time." Mark's heart raced. This was no ordinary discovery. They were standing on the edge of something monumental, something that could change everything they knew about the galaxy. "Do you think this could be a lost civilization?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "A species we didn't even know existed?" Zaelith didn't respond right away. Her mind was already analyzing the map, the coordinates flickering in her thoughts like a puzzle she had to solve. She had never heard of such a place, but the idea of an ancient civilization hidden away, its secrets buried for millennia, stirred something deep within her. The thought of uncovering something so old, so powerful, was both thrilling and dangerous. "We have to investigate," she said at last, turning to Mark. "If these coordinates are correct, we may be on the brink of discovering something the Tylarian Empire never even imagined." Mark's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then let's go. I'm ready." Zaelith hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just another mission. It wasn't just about science or exploration. There was something more personal at stake here. As she stood there, looking at Mark, she realized how much their partnership had grown. What started as a simple exchange of knowledge between a scientist and a human had turned into something far more significant. Mark was right there beside her, willing to face the unknown. He wasn't afraid. In fact, his courage seemed to fuel hers. It was strange, this connection they had forged in such a short time. She had never considered that a human might be the one to help her unlock the mysteries of the universe. "We'll need a ship," Zaelith said, pushing her thoughts aside and focusing on the practicalities. "And a crew." "I know a few people who can help with that," Mark replied, already pulling up his contacts on his communicator. "This could be big, Zaelith. Bigger than either of us realized." Zaelith nodded, feeling a surge of excitement. This could be the breakthrough of a lifetime, and they were about to embark on it together. But there was also a lingering sense of unease. What if they weren't the first ones to find this place? What if someone else was already searching for the secrets hidden there? As Mark made arrangements, Zaelith stood by, her mind swirling with possibilities. She couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. They were stepping into the unknown, and there was no turning back now. Mark looked up from his communicator and met her gaze. "Ready?" Zaelith took one last look at the artifact. Its soft glow still lingered, like a beacon calling them forward into the vastness of the galaxy. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady with resolve. The journey to Xylaris Prime was quicker than Zaelith expected. Mark's resourcefulness had already come into play. He had secured a ship and a small crew of experienced humans, eager for adventure. Despite Zaelith's reservations about traveling with a human crew, Mark assured her that they were more than capable. Zaelith stood on the bridge of the small vessel, the view of the stars stretching out before her. She had been to countless planets, seen countless stars, but something about this journey felt different. As the ship hummed steadily, the map of coordinates she had uncovered burned in her mind, a constant reminder of the unknown that awaited them. Beside her, Mark was busy coordinating the ship's systems with his crew. He looked over at her with a smile. "I know you're not used to human ships, but I promise, we're pretty good at this." Zaelith gave him a nod, her arms crossed as she tried to appear disinterested. "I'm not concerned about your ship. It's the destination that matters." Mark chuckled. "True, but you have to admit, it's better when the ship gets us there in one piece." Zaelith couldn't help but smile, despite herself. There was something comforting in Mark's lightheartedness, even in the face of such an uncertain journey. As different as their species were, his optimism and courage felt familiar. In a way, she had begun to rely on it. The hours passed, and the crew made preparations for their arrival. As they neared the coordinates, a strange sense of anticipation filled the air. Zaelith couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something that had been hidden for far too long. But she also couldn't ignore the unease that accompanied the thought. What if they weren't the only ones searching for the lost civilization? What if others had already discovered it and wanted to keep it a secret? "How are you holding up?" Mark asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. He had noticed her distracted expression. Zaelith met his gaze, her amethyst eyes unwavering. "I'm fine, but I'm also cautious. This place, it's too perfect, too hidden. There's something we're not seeing." Mark nodded thoughtfully, understanding her hesitation. "I get it, but we're in this together, Zaelith. Whatever we find, we'll figure it out. Together." For a moment, Zaelith said nothing. She simply looked out at the stars. It was rare for her to trust anyone this easily, especially a human. Yet with Mark, she felt a connection she hadn't expected. His presence had a grounding effect on her, something she couldn't explain. The ship began to slow as they approached the uncharted region. The coordinates had led them to a cluster of seemingly empty space, a void that didn't show up on any standard maps. The area was strangely quiet, no sign of life anywhere. "Are we sure this is it?" Mark asked, peering at the readout on his console. "There's nothing here." Zaelith's eyes scanned the readings on her own display, her mind working quickly. "It's here. We just need to keep going." And so they did. The ship plunged deeper into the unknown, the silence growing more intense. Zaelith felt her pulse quicken, a mix of excitement and anxiety flooding her senses. What would they find at the heart of this emptiness? As the ship moved closer to the center of the void, the tension in the air was thick. Mark stepped up beside her. "Whatever happens, Zaelith, we've already made history. Let's see what's next." Zaelith glanced at him, her expression serious. "Yes, but we must remain cautious. History can be as dangerous as it is enlightening." With those words, the ship entered the mysterious space, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The ship drifted silently through the unknown space, the vast emptiness surrounding them like a thick, invisible wall. Zaelith stood at the helm, her fingers lightly grazing the controls, while Mark watched her closely from beside her. Despite the stillness, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation in the air. "I can't believe we're actually here," Mark said, his voice filled with awe. "This place, it's like nothing I've ever seen before." Zaelith didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the readouts, scanning for any sign of movement, any anomaly. But the space was too quiet, too still. It felt like they were drifting into a void, isolated from everything they had known. "We're not alone," she murmured to herself as much a warning to herself as it was to Mark. Mark turned to look at her, his expression confused. "What do you mean?" Zalith's hand tightened on the controls. "The readings are off. The energy patterns are unstable. It's like the space itself is trying to block us." Mark stepped closer. "Is that even possible? Could the space itself be alive?" Zalith didn't answer at first. She had always trusted in science, in logic, but this felt different. It was as though something was watching them, something ancient and powerful that didn't want them here. "Whatever it is, it doesn't want us here," she said finally, her voice tense. "We should proceed carefully." Just as she spoke, the ship's warning alarms blared, cutting through the stillness of the void. The sudden sound startled both of them. Mark's eyes went wide as he looked at the console. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice rising in alarm. Zalith's mind raced. The energy patterns were spiking. Something was coming toward them. She quickly analyzed the data and then froze. "Something's approaching," she said, her voice cold. "It's too fast, too powerful. We're not going to outrun it." Mark's heart raced. The excitement of discovery was quickly fading, replaced by fear. "What do we do?" Zalith's fingers flew over the controls, trying to access the ship's defense systems. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "We have to prepare." As the ship's systems began to power up, Zalith could feel the pressure mounting. They had entered a dangerous part of space, and whatever was coming toward them wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was deliberate. The ship shook violently as a massive force field enveloped them, sending sparks across the dashboard. Zalith cursed under her breath, fighting to regain control. "Brace yourself," she shouted to Mark. The ship jolted as an enormous energy blast struck them, knocking the vessel off course. For a brief moment, everything seemed to spin in slow motion. Mark gripped the side of the console, his breath quickening as he held on, watching Zalith work furiously to regain control. "Get us out of here," he yelled. Zalith's face was set in concentration. She had never faced anything like this before. Her mind raced, trying to calculate their next move. The energy blast had temporarily disabled their shields, leaving them vulnerable. But then, something unexpected happened. The attacking force seemed to pause, as if calculating its next move. "Do you see that?" Mark asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Zalith looked up, seeing the same thing. A massive structure, hidden within the void, began to emerge in front of them. It was enormous, ancient, and unlike anything they had ever seen. The very walls of the structure seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though it were alive. Zalith's heart skipped a beat. "It's a trap," she said, her voice low. Mark looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" "It's not just a structure. It's a defense system," Zalith explained, her tone grim. "It's alive, and it's been waiting for us." The ship lurched again, as though the structure was drawing them in, refusing to let them go. Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine as he realized the danger they were in. "We need to make a choice," Zalith said, turning to him. "We can try to escape, but we risk triggering the full force of its defense. Or we can take a risk and enter the structure, see what's inside." Mark swallowed hard. The choice was theirs, but it wasn't an easy one. Whatever lay ahead, it was certain they had just entered the heart of the unknown. The strange, ancient structure loomed ahead, its enormous dark walls pulsing with an eerie energy that seemed to breathe with life. The ship shook again as though it was being pulled toward the massive opening, which loomed like the mouth of some great beast ready to swallow them whole. Zalith gripped the controls tightly, her mind racing. The choice had been made. They couldn't escape. The structure had already drawn them in, and now they had no choice but to face whatever lay beyond its walls. "We're going in," Zalith said firmly, her voice filled with determination, though the weight of the situation was evident in her eyes. Mark's jaw tightened, We don't have much of a choice, do we? Zaelith didn't answer, instead focusing on the controls, guiding the ship closer to the massive entrance. The closer they got, the more powerful the pull from the structure became, like a magnetic force dragging them in. Mark stood beside her, watching the approaching structure with a mix of awe and fear. The feeling of being trapped, of having no control over their fate, was unsettling. But something else had begun to stir within him as well, a sense of awe at the mystery before them. And it was hard to ignore the connection that had grown between him and Zaelith over the course of this journey. As they entered the structure, the ship's lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. Zaelith quickly activated the ship's internal systems, ensuring their safety as much as possible. "We're in," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of uncertainty. "Now, we need to find out what this place is. There's something here, Mark, something powerful." Mark nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about how strange it felt to be so close to Zaelith. For the first time, he noticed the slight tension in her posture, the way she kept her distance, as if she were protecting herself from something. Her cool exterior was a mask for something deeper. "Zaelith," Mark said softly, his voice carrying over the hum of the ship's systems. "Are you okay?" Zaelith glanced at him, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she turned back to the control panel, her fingers brushing over the screens in a quiet flurry of activity. But Mark could tell she was distracted. "I'm fine," she said, but it was too quick, too dismissive. Mark knew her better than that now. He took a step closer, sensing the vulnerability beneath her usual confident exterior. "I know you're fine, but you're not really fine, are you?" Zaelith's gaze softened. For the briefest of moments, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something raw, something real. She turned her head away, unable to meet his gaze. Mark's heart skipped. "Zaelith," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking about us, about this journey, and everything we've gone through together. I never expected any of this, to be here with you, facing the unknown. I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who understands what it's like to push through, to take risks, to keep going no matter what." Zaelith stiffened, but Mark continued, his words coming from the heart. "I know we're from different worlds. We're not supposed to be close, but I can't help but feel that we are. I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in my life." Zaelith's breath caught in her throat. She felt something stir inside her, a warmth spreading through her chest, but she couldn't allow herself to acknowledge it. This wasn't the time. They were on the edge of uncovering something monumental, something that could change the course of everything. "I don't know what to say," Zaelith whispered, her voice barely audible. This mission, Mark, it's everything I've worked for. I don't expect anything from you," Mark said quickly. "But you should know that I'm here, and I'm with you, no matter what happens next." Zaelith turned to him, meeting his gaze for the first time with a quiet intensity. For a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. There was no structure, no unknown dangers, just the two of them, sharing something unspoken. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but soft. "You've helped me more than you know." Before Mark could reply, the ship shook violently, the lights flickering and the walls of the structure seeming to tremble. Zaelith immediately snapped into action, her focus shifting back to the control panel. "Whatever this is," she said, her voice now sharp with determination, "we need to keep moving." As the ship continued deeper into the structure, the bond between Zaelith and Mark felt stronger than ever. The dangers ahead might be unknown, but they were no longer facing them alone. Together, they would face whatever awaited them in the heart of the mysterious place. The deeper they went into the ancient structure, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The walls were lined with strange, glowing patterns, their shapes shifting constantly, as though alive. The ship moved slowly, the hum of its engines echoing in the oppressive silence. The only light came from the faint glow of the walls and the ship's dim interior. Zaelith's fingers moved over the control panel with practiced precision, but her mind was elsewhere. The energy readings were unlike anything she had encountered before. There was a strange resonance, something almost familiar yet completely foreign. "We're close," she murmured, more to herself than to Mark, though he was watching her closely. "This place, it's not just a structure. It's a system, a machine of some kind." Mark, standing beside her, couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. A machine. What kind of machine? Zaelith's eyes narrowed as she scanned the data. A very old one. But it's still active. I think it's been waiting. Waiting for us. Waiting for us. Mark repeated, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" She turned to him, her face serious. "I don't know yet, but I think we've triggered something. Something that was dormant for a long time." Just then, the ship jolted as if hit by a sudden force. Mark grabbed the armrest, his heart racing. "What was that?" he asked, his voice tight. "I don't know," Zaelith replied, her voice calm but tinged with concern. She quickly checked the readouts. "We've crossed into a deeper part of the structure. We're not alone anymore." Before Mark could respond, a loud mechanical noise filled the air, and the ship's engines sputtered. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the control room. Zaelith's hands flew over the console, trying to regain control of the failing systems. "What's happening?" Mark asked, panic creeping into his voice. "The structure is interfering with our systems," Zaelith said, her voice steady despite the urgency. "It's blocking our communications, our navigation, everything." Mark looked out the viewport, his eyes wide. The walls of the structure were shifting, closing in around them. A massive door ahead slowly creaked open, revealing a chamber of immense size. It was filled with strange symbols, each one glowing with a brilliant light. Zaelith exhaled sharply. "This is it, the heart of the machine." Mark's eyes widened. "Are we supposed to go in there?" "We don't have a choice," Zaelith said. "The ship is being pulled in. We're going to have to land." The ship was drawn toward the entrance, the force growing stronger by the second. Zaelith tightened her grip on the controls, struggling to slow the ship's descent. As they landed, the ship was engulfed by the bright light from the chamber, its landing gear scraping against the ancient stone floor. The ship settled with a heavy thud, and the lights blinked off completely. "Stay close," Zaelith said, her voice firm but low. "We don't know what's waiting for us inside." Mark nodded, his pulse quickening as he followed Zaelith out of the ship. The moment they stepped onto the floor, the air seemed to hum with energy, the faint vibrations sending a shiver through his spine. The chamber was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were lined with enormous, intricate patterns, glowing with a soft blue light. In the center of the room stood a massive pedestal, covered in the same glowing symbols. Zaelith approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the pedestal. This is a control center. It's the core of the entire structure." Mark stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "What do you think it does?" "I think it controls everything," Zaelith said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The energy we're feeling, the pulling force on the ship, it's all coming from here." She reached out a hand to touch the pedestal. As her fingers made contact with the surface, the symbols flared to life, glowing brighter, casting an eerie light around the room. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, startling them both. It wasn't spoken, it was felt, deep within their minds, like a wave of understanding that transcended language. "Welcome, travelers. You have awakened the heart of the machine." Mark's breath caught in his throat. "What is this? Who's speaking?" Zaelith stared at the pedestal, her expression unreadable. It's not a voice. It's a consciousness, something ancient, something alive." The voice continued, resonating through them both. "You seek knowledge. But are you ready for the truth?" Mark looked at Zaelith, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt more uncertain in his life. "I don't know if we're ready," he whispered, "but I guess we'll find out." The chamber was silent again, the glowing symbols on the pedestal still pulsing with a steady rhythm, as though waiting for their next move. Zaelith and Mark stood in the eerie quiet, the voices' questions still lingering in the air like an unspoken challenge. "You heard that, right?" Mark asked, his voice tense with a mix of awe and fear. Zaelith nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the pedestal. "Yes, this thing. It's alive, but not in the way we understand life. It's ancient, far older than anything I've encountered in Silurian history." Mark took a cautious step forward, drawn toward the pedestal's strange light. "So, what does it want with us?" "I don't know," Zaelith said, her voice low. "But it spoke directly to us, and that means something. It doesn't usually interact with outsiders. I don't think it's been awake for a very long time." Mark looked around the chamber, trying to make sense of the situation. The walls were covered in intricate patterns, like some ancient language, one he couldn't hope to understand. But whatever it was clear that they were standing at the center of something monumental. They had triggered something that was far beyond their understanding. The voice returned, but this time it was different, deeper, more intense. "You seek knowledge," the voice intoned, "but knowledge comes with a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The question echoed in his mind, and despite the fear rising in his chest, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant to be here. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a test, a trial of sorts. Zaelith turned to him, her face serious. "Whatever happens, Mark, we have to be careful. This place, it's not just an artifact. It's a living system, and I don't know what it will do if we push it too far." Mark swallowed hard but nodded. He was scared, but a part of him couldn't walk away now. They were so close. They had come all this way, through the dangers, the unknown, and now, standing in the heart of this alien machine, he felt like they were about to unlock something bigger than both of them. The voice continued, its words resonating deeply within them both. "The truth is not for the faint of heart. Once it is revealed, you cannot return to ignorance. Will you accept the burden?" Zaelith glanced at Mark, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign of hesitation. Mark met her gaze, his chest tight, but his decision clear. "We came for the truth," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "We can't turn back now." Zaelith took a deep breath, her usual confidence returning. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the pedestal, just as she had before. This time, the symbols flashed brighter, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. The voice spoke again, this time softer, as if acknowledging their decision. "Then be prepared. The truth will be shown, but it will not be kind. Know this, there is no turning back." With those final words, the pedestal began to shift. The floor beneath them trembled slightly, and the walls seemed to pulse, as if the entire structure was waking up from a long slumber. Zaelith pulled her hand away from the pedestal, her eyes wide with both fear and wonder. The symbols on the pedestal rearranged themselves rapidly, forming a new pattern, a map, but not one of stars or planets. Instead, it showed a timeline, an intricate sequence of events that spanned eons, reaching far beyond the boundaries of their galaxy. Mark stepped closer, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The timeline showed ancient civilizations, long-forgotten worlds, and then something that chilled him to the core, a dark shadow spreading across the stars. It was as if something had been trying to consume everything in its path, wiping out entire species, entire galaxies. "What is this?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. Zaelith's breath caught in her throat as she studied the timeline. "It's a history of the universe, but not the one we know. This shadow, this force, it's been moving through time, consuming everything in its wake." Mark looked at her, his mind racing. Are you saying this machine, is some kind of warning, a defense? Zaelith nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. It's been protecting the universe from something far worse. And now, it seems we've awakened it, whatever it was meant to stop. The pedestal's light grew brighter as the final piece of the timeline fell into place. The shadow, the consuming darkness, it was moving toward them, drawing closer with every passing second. Mark's heart sank. It's not just a warning, it's a countdown. Zaelith turned to him, her expression grave. We need to stop it. The chamber was alive with the hum of energy as the light from the pedestal flickered rapidly. The timeline on the surface had completed itself, revealing a dark, ominous pattern. A countdown, a final warning. The shadow that had once consumed entire civilizations was now moving closer, its presence a chilling certainty. Zaelith and Mark stood frozen, the weight of what they had uncovered pressing heavily on their shoulders. Mark's pulse raced. He could feel the room closing in around him, the air thick with the anticipation of what was to come. What do we do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zaelith's eyes were wide, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. We need to stop it. We have to find a way to disrupt this machine before it completes its purpose. If that shadow reaches us, if it consumes everything, it will be the end of everything. Mark's mind was spinning. He couldn't fathom the weight of her words. The universe was on the edge of something far worse than they could possibly imagine. The idea of stopping something so powerful felt impossible, but he couldn't back down now, not after everything they had been through. Are we really supposed to stop it? Mark asked, his voice filled with disbelief. What if this machine wasn't just protecting us, but? Zaelith looked at him, her expression hardening. The machine was meant to stop something, but it looks like it's failed, and now we're the ones who have to finish what it started. The pedestal continued to hum, its light growing brighter. The countdown was almost complete. Mark glanced at the strange symbols flickering above the pedestal, each one pulsing like a heartbeat. There had to be a way to stop this, to disrupt the flow of energy, to break the cycle. But how? Zaelith moved toward the pedestal, her mind working furiously. She ran her hands over the surface, trying to decode the shifting symbols. Mark watched her closely, a strange mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. She had always been the one with the answers, the one who could solve the mysteries. But this time, it felt like they were facing something beyond anyone's understanding. The machine has been dormant for too long, Zaelith said quietly, more to herself than to Mark. We've triggered it, but we can't let it finish its purpose. If this timeline continues, it'll lead to the end of everything. It'll reach the core of the universe, where the energy is concentrated, and it will be destroyed. Mark stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Then we stop it, together. Zaelith turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. She could see the resolve in his eyes, the courage he had shown from the moment they had met. Despite everything, despite the overwhelming odds, Mark had always stood by her. It was a comfort she hadn't expected, yet now it was the only thing keeping her grounded. You're right, she said. We can't do this alone. But if we don't act now, it will be too late. The symbols on the pedestal flashed brightly, and the room shook as if the structure itself was reacting to their decision. The energy was building, swirling around them like a storm, the countdown now only moments away from completion. We need to overload the system, Zaelith said, her voice firm with determination. If we can inject a power surge into the core, it will disrupt the cycle. It might cause a massive explosion, but it's the only chance we have. Mark nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. How do we do it? Zaelith quickly scanned the pedestal, her eyes lighting up as she deciphered a series of hidden commands. There's a terminal near the center of the room, she said, pointing toward a glowing spot on the floor. If we activate it, we can redirect the energy into the core. Mark didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the terminal, his mind focused on one thing, stopping the countdown. The air was thick with tension, the machine's hum growing louder with each passing second. Zaelith followed close behind, working quickly to unlock the sequence that would trigger the energy surge. Together, they reached the terminal. Zaelith began typing in the sequence, her fingers moving with precision. Mark kept watch, his eyes darting between the pedestal and the countdown that was rapidly reaching its final moments. With a final press of a button, Zaelith activated the sequence. The chamber trembled violently as the pedestal began to shake, the energy surging through the room in a brilliant flash of light. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The machine, the light, the very air itself. Then, with a deafening roar, the entire structure erupted in a wave of energy. The light from the pedestal exploded outward, the shockwave sending them both flying backward. Mark's vision blurred, his body slammed against the cold floor,